For some directors, networking may feel like a chore, but it can be one of the most valuable practices for deepening governance insights and staying current in the boardroom. Happy New Year, and welcome to BoardVision, the official podcast of the NACD, the National Association of Corporate Directors. We share perspectives from leading corporate directors and explore what makes boards effective, including how they can help companies prepare for the future. In this episode, Katrinka McCallum, a director on the boards of ACI Worldwide and Intrusion, spoke with NACD advisor Susan Paley. Together, they explore the value of board networks. They also discuss practical strategies for making networking purposeful rather than transactional, ways to balance time and resources, and how a network evolves over the arc of a director's board career. Have you heard about the benefits of NACD's certification program? Today's boards operate in a dynamic and rapidly evolving world. The National Association of Corporate Directors provides directorship certification that sets the standard for high-impact board directors. It's more than certification. This is the premier program, preparing directors to successfully navigate an increasingly complex business and governance landscape. NACD's directorship certification will enable you to demonstrate commitment, deliver confidently, and create real value for your organization. Learn more and apply today at nacdonline.org. And now, your host.
Katrinka McCallum, thanks for joining us. This BoardVision episode, we decided to make the topic board networks. And I have to tell you from the get-go, some people listening might say, ooh, that word network, I'm a little uncomfortable with that word. It could be the most dreaded activity for many folks to do some networking. So can you tell us, why is networking important once you're on a board?
Hi, Susan. Thanks for having me today. It's been really exciting to get to know you and to be here. You know, networking is about, like we have done over the last couple of days, getting to know each other, right? It is painful for some. And I think it's also overwhelming because there's so much coming at us, so many choices of where we can network, how we network. And I just looked at my inbox before coming here today, and it was filled with opportunities for virtual opportunities or for in-person activities or events that are happening down the lane in a couple of months. And it's just about that choice and how do you spend your time that I think is one of the first things people should start to think about when it comes to networking. But you asked sort of why is it important as a director to actually invest that time into networking? And I personally think it's part of our responsibility as a director to stay current with what's happening in industry, to stay current with what's happening on the governance landscape, to stay current with what's happening outside of the industry of the companies on which we serve. And frankly, just to be curious about what's going on in the world, right? So there's so many opportunities to invest your time into staying up to date. And I think networking is one of those vehicles for being able to do that. And therefore, it pays a benefit back for the time you actually take to make the effort to do so.
In these busy, crowded times when schedules are bursting, you talk about importance of staying up to date. Why can't I, as a director, do that just by reading everything that comes into my inbox and checking with my NomGov committee chair and staying abreast virtually? What is the importance of being either face-to-face or on the phone with some other human?
I think there's a responsibility, actually, for us to do some of that outside effort, outside of the information that's coming to us from our companies. I think a lot of us learn better by actually having that engaged conversation and the analogies that people can draw from by having an example, by learning from somebody who's gone through a situation where they can actually share that example or share a scenario that helps us just to crystallize that learning. So I think the dialogue helps to make that stickier than just reading through information that's coming across our email box.
Time and again in these conversations on this podcast and elsewhere, we hear reminders that it's the relationships that really matter, that human connection.
We need a community, right? We need that sort of cohort of people that are in the same boat, rowing in similar directions, They don't have to be all at the same organization. They don't have to be necessarily all in the same industry that we're in, but just people that are in the same stage that we are in our careers and in our area of expertise, which is board directors. It's the ability to govern. It's the ability to mentor the leadership teams. And I think being able to find that community of people that are in that same stage as us is actually really, really valuable effort.
I also was delighted to hear you say, my inbox is full of, we rarely hear this descriptor, full of opportunities. I don't know how many listeners are agreeing that inbox is bursting with opportunities. They may get a bit of eye rolling. You mentioned choice was important. When you talk about choice and these opportunities that you can summon you from your inbox and these different industries you can cross, I want to ask you about what intentional networking really looks like, because we talk about it not being just casual, whatever's floating in front of your radar. How do I know I'm not just ad hoc networking, whatever's coming my way, but I'm really doing that intentionally?
I'm going to provide sort of me as an example, and not everybody is going to reflect that they look like me or behave like me and I tend to be a little structured in the way I think about things, but I'm giving you a framework, and whether it works for you or not works for you as a listener, I'm hoping that a framework like this is something that you can use as maybe an idea board and see what does work for you. But for me, I go into every year or so with a calendar in mind of areas of time where I can actually network with people that are in their board journey. And some of that time that I'm looking for is to invest in education, to invest in governance principles or sort of what the latest topics are from the SEC or PCAOB or other sort of regulatory oversight bodies. Some of that time is actually looking for people that are similar in terms of committee expertise and experience so that I can draw from and find people that I can sort of soundbite with or share examples with when it comes to, I sit on audit committees and nom-gov committees. And so it's helpful for me to have those resources. And sometimes I look at it from how do I want to develop my career and where am I going to meet people that might enable me to be in front of opportunities to expand my board portfolio. And so I kind of chunk it out in terms of the type of engagement I'm looking for. I actually do spend a fair amount of time looking at not only the time budget that I have, but also the actual dollars that I have to invest in, whether it's traveling to events, the ability to join a membership organization to be able to participate in a networking activity, and the quality of that. And I think that over time, you start to find organizations that you see real value exchange with. For me, my local chapter of NACD actually is really fantastic here in the Triangle of North Carolina. I love the events that we have. It's worth the time to actually carve those out on my calendar and try to protect that time throughout the course of the year. I think people need to think about it as thinking of this intentional networking is really dialing back to what is it that you're looking to try to achieve in the engagement with others? How much time can you give to that? How much money do you have, if needed, to be able to invest in that? And then another area of time or sort of structure behind the scenes might be building that spreadsheet so that you actually can map this out and that you can start to track who you are talking with and know which part of those conversations you remember. It's a great way to sort of remember the conversation with people. Of course, you're going to probably LinkedIn connect with folks, but just having a place to go back to, a notebook, a spreadsheet, something in your iPad where you've drawn out information to be able to remember those conversations is a super helpful tool for me to remind myself before I go into the next meeting where I know that person might be there, just as to what we had talked about and follow up on. It just helps with that engagement and keeping that relationship getting stronger and stronger every time you interact with that person or people in those types of forums.
Katrinka, what you outlined was so completely drenched in intention. You talked about, how do I want to use my time and energy? What are my actions around that given my budget of both time, money, and so forth? And then even to the point of tracking that ROI, if you will. It's through the lens that a real director mindset, almost like you're your own little business, dare I say. What comes up for me is when we talk about return on investment, it's around coming back to me, right? What did I get out of it? And of course, we all are experienced enough to know that that's not the whole story of networking, that we have a two-sided story. So how can we ensure that our networking activities are not at risk of being transactional and are really authentic while also being effective? What can a director do to ensure that? And then maybe even more to the point, what should they not do?
You talked about how I was thinking about my time. I think to make this an authentic relationship building, it's also about thinking about the other people in this and their time. So for example, if I'm looking to help navigate conversations that might help me curate opportunities to further expand my board portfolio, not everybody in those conversations is going to want to participate. They may not have opportunities or be aware of opportunities. They may not actually want to be in a position where they actually have to put forward people into opportunities or have the time to even mentor somebody into those types of roles and opportunities. So just knowing that there is a respect on the other side as well of the other person's time is a way to demonstrate sort of that authentic appreciation for the effort that is being put forth by the individual in the networking relationship that's developing. I think understanding that on your end, going in with intention and being thoughtful about how you spend time. Maybe it's a phone conversation or a video conversation, or maybe it's an in-person conversation. Just knowing that you're going to have a limited amount of the other person's time and attention, make sure you know what you're asking for. Are you asking for some help for a career opportunity? Are you looking for benchmarking so that the company on which you're serving on a board for may be looking for some benchmarking ideas for decisions that they're making? Perhaps it's a committee level type of topic where you're looking at taking into account some new changes that are happening at a regulatory level, and you're looking for insights as to how other organizations are implementing and at what rate they're implementing some of those recommended changes. Just knowing why you're having the conversation and what you're looking for helps to create that balance between the time you're investing in the conversation and the expectations that you have of the others and what you expect of them to be able to give back.
What a beautiful way to frame it. So I hear a couple things. I hear that there's an idea, this is a limited resource. I'm not going to get this person's time forever. So know your why going in. And it strikes me when you start to explain this, that not only could you garner insights around regulatory changes or committee specifics, which really could be a force multiplier for a board if they have 10 board members and they're all leveraging their networks for insights to bring back. But the boardroom, I thought, likewise, you're a resource for the person on the other end of the phone, that they may be garnering insights for their industry.
Absolutely.
What we've talked about so far, Katrinka, is really about personal actions that you pick up a phone or you reach out and you leverage network ties. I've heard of organizations like a club in a city or an industry. Are there any entities or groups that directors should look to perhaps lean into to activate networks and augment the connections they already have?
Thinking locally is one opportunity. There are so many organizations across the country that are locally developing chapters for support of directors. Obviously, we can start with NACD as the starting point, and I already gave my shout out to my local chapter, but I actually also lean in on the virtual events that other chapters around the country have offered. By doing so, the calendar of opportunities opens up for me to be able to participate and even build networks with people outside of my local community, but still through NACD chapters. So I find that to be fantastic. I do know that there are also industry forums, tech associations. I'm in the tech sector, locally to nationally, that I participate in. There are vendor-based types of seminars and events that are put on that are super opportunities to stay current in my industry. And then there are things that I look at, like the big accounting firms that offer opportunities to attend conferences. Some of those are virtual, some of those are in person, and definitely keeping one up to date on audit committee types of topics, very relevant for the work that I do in audit committees. As I've actually developed some of my own strategy, I've looked to my college, to my grad school, and they all have organizations that are super interested in helping support business executives and executives moving into the boardroom. I encourage people to look at their university and their graduate school level networks, because I think there are roles for that type of affinity and support. And then as it comes to affinity groups, of course, there are women's organizations, there are minority organizations that are there to support us as we move down this journey in our board careers as well.
Wow, if people were keeping score at home, you must have just listed maybe 10 or 12 different avenues to pursue. I didn't think of some of those myself. So you're clearly an expert on this. To a large degree, you do practice what you preach. And I am wondering, how have you witnessed in your own life your becoming a better director for having gone down these paths and networked while you're a board member in these ways?
For me, it's a growth opportunity. You can tell I'm an optimist, probably. And so I look at a conversation as an opportunity to learn something. And I try to look at each conversation as an opportunity to at least learn one thing new that I didn't know. And that way, I feel like I walk away from a conversation with a return on that time investment. We all know we have those conversations at events and we walk away and we think about it and we're like, well, I'll never get those 5 minutes of my life back. So I'm not totally pie in the sky. Those do happen and they definitely do happen to me too. But, I think one of the things that I look at is the ability to have the conversation, to learn one thing new or different, just helps me take that forward and put that into practice potentially. One thought I had in preparing for this conversation is that not all of this has to be verbal observation either. And I do think it's helpful to watch people in action, to watch people in the boardroom, to watch body language, to watch how they show up in the boardroom on panels, how they are communicating information, because there's a lot you can learn from observing others that you can put into practice too. And if there's somebody that does that well, what a great opportunity to go up to that person at a conference after they've come off of the 4-person panel and go speak to them about how they developed that skill set. And you'll be surprised at how that actually becomes a networking topic of how to actually strengthen yourself and how you show up in the room.
Katrinka, what an intelligent step to take. I can imagine that would have a ripple effect across listeners going and doing something like that now. And I also couldn't help but think recent podcast episodes that I had the pleasure of hosting, we had one guest, Virginia Gambal, who was talking about the really critical importance, she's a chair of a publicly traded company, of listening and chiming in last when opinions are given around the table. We had Keith Dorsey on as a guest who talked about imposter syndrome, about how it's a real, not imagined thing, even at the board level. And so when I think about comments like that, I think, oh, right, we can learn and better ourselves as directors by watching, to your point, body language or how somebody leans in, how somebody listens, and without going to school for it, as it were, garner insights from peers just by watching. So I think that's a really valuable takeaway. And I wanted to reference something you said. You mentioned earlier, you're on some committees. You mentioned audit, you mentioned NomGov. Honing in for just a moment on the NomGov committee that you are experienced on, I think more than one board of directors. How does the broad, high quality network of directors that those NomGov committee folks are attached to make a richer tapestry of candidates or individuals that you can reach out to bring value to the board of directors itself? How does networking involve itself there?
The role of NomGov is important, and it may vary slightly between companies. But obviously, one of the roles that the NomGov committee has is helping to recruit directors to the organization and map out director succession planning. And so the very easy starting point for networking is to open up those opportunities to one's network and see if you can find a candidate that is within that network that you have that would be well suited to bring the skill set that's needed and the cultural imprint that's being looked for in a new director. In addition to that, references for service providers, recruiting firms, or firms that can help with developing succession planning. One of the things that I think more seasoned directors have at their fingertips is that set of connections into organizations that can help with whether it's CEO succession planning at large as an organization. But there are organizations beyond recruiting firms that specialize in helping companies develop a strategy for succession planning, for doing the inventory of existing individuals in the company, gap analysis, development plans, and the like, and being able to tap into referenceable resources like that because you have a network of people that serve on similar committees or a network of people that have served on boards for a long while is actually invaluable to be able to leverage that sort of knowledge base and to bring that forward to the companies on which you serve.
Katrinka, you're getting such logical, really valuable insights around actions that folks can take. My question that probably up for me now is the board members' perspectives, no doubt, can be a little bit narrow. They came up in a certain industry. They became experts in that industry, whether it's financial services or whatever it might be, technology. And then their network can be, it can all look and smell the same, right? They came from similar industry jobs. So what happens when one exposes oneself as a director to various industries or committees, as you said earlier? And why is that valuable now, relevant to what you might have told me 10 years ago, in an environment now where business is at the pace that it's at and technology is advancing like it is, and we all know at a rapid pace?
I'm thirsty for information on how to adapt to new technologies, whether it's the cyber changes and sort of the risk management that we need to be taking inside of the profiles of the companies, the boards I'm on, or it's AI and how do I even use this stuff how does my company use it? And what questions should I be asking in the boardroom that actually stimulate the right conversation around the board table? And having the ability to have people from different industries or different backgrounds to be able to bring to light how they're using some of these rapidly changing technologies is a way for me to shorten my learning curve. It's a way for me to feel less afraid of the change that's happening out there and more confident that I can ask good questions. I don't need to be an expert. I know I don't need to be an AI prompt engineering expert and developing the latest and greatest enablement for a product team. But I do need to ask questions around how is our company considering that? What are the policies? What are the risks associated with that? And having some examples of companies that are doing that a little bit ahead of where we are is super helpful because it allows me to then use that knowledge to ask those questions in a confident way and in a useful and mentoring way for the organization.
We spoke about diversifying your network and going almost broad. I'm thinking my fingers are trending outward. These are broad ties. I'm wondering about going vertically in the timeline of one's career and how networking might differ when you're even an aspiring director or an early stage director, junior in your directorship, compared to when you're much more seasoned. What does that curve look like?
So I'm definitely on that maturity curve. I think a lot about it because I look back 4 or 5, 6 years ago when I was developing my strategy to leave my operating roles and build a board portfolio as a sort of next chapter for myself. And the types of networking questions I had at that point in time were definitely much more looking for feedback and looking for a better understanding of the role in the boardroom and validating my unique value proposition and the fit that I could bring. And so the networking types of questions were definitely a little bit more drawn towards me than they were towards the people that I was tapping into. The organizations that I joined were also different in terms of there was help around supporting me in that learning curve. There was the onboarding educational types of programs that I tapped into, like NACD offers and other organizations I did up into to help me feel more confident in myself and in my capabilities. And with that was a burgeoning network of people. What I realized then is that my day-to-day network was a lot of operators, a lot of people that understood how to run the businesses that like I did. And I didn't have a huge network of board directors to tap into. And so my mission was to build that network. Now that I'm sort of in the next set of stages of my board portfolio or my board career or chapter, I find that I'm actually more interested in meeting people that are experienced directors, where we can share audit committee to audit committee, nom-gov to nom-gov, governance changes and adaptations around those regulatory changes that are really more meaningful to the role as the director. And I find that I'm mentoring some of those people and helping to still demystify the path to the boardroom so that I can bring that next generation along with me. And I suspect as I continue down this career and this journey as a board director, I'll be looking at developing additional leadership skills in potentially being a board chair or a lead independent director, looking in roles like that. And so I'll be again back to the early days of learning and drawing from instead of as much giving in the networking exchanges. And hopefully towards the tail end of my career, it is about passing the wisdom along that I've developed and continuing to pay it forward, because I think that's really where we all feel the legacy or the opportunity to leave such imprint is measured.
It's such a beautiful story, actually. You're really describing a virtuous circle, that you come from a more junior place, you get more mature, seasoned, and then you're back to start again in certain regards. And it's nice to have our listeners appreciate that there's not so much arriving as there is the journey.
And that's what makes networking so hard, right? Because it's not a one and done. That's why I actually do sit down once a year and sort of look at my calendar, and maybe I do it even more than once a year, but it's not more than twice a year, I don't think. But where I sit down and I really do map out sort of deliberately, how am I spending my time and how do I want to spend my time this year and what do I need this year? Sometimes I don't need to go to the event year after year after year that's offered. I can go every other year, or I can go maybe 3 years. And that builds room in my time and my budget to be able to build on something new that I want to invest my time in this year. And maybe it's time to also sunset a couple of organizations where I've spent time that are no longer as meaningful to the exchange that I'm looking for at this point in my career.
So, Katrinka, you had said earlier in our conversation, and I loved this, I wrote it down as a little bit of mantra. You said you really like to make sure that from everything you walk away having learned one new thing. And applying that to our conversation as we wrap up today, what would you hope our directors who are listening walk away with? What's their one new thing that you hope they learned?
One mentor of mine in this journey actually gave me this analogy, and it's about gardening. I'm not an expert gardener, but I think everybody can kind of understand this analogy. The networking efforts that we take is like setting seeds in the ground. First, you have to prepare the ground. Then you get the opportunity at the right time to plant the seeds. You have to water the ground, fertilize it, tend to the weeds. And there's a wait. And there's a growing period. And there's the taking care of the shoots that do grow and trimming the dead heads that also exists there, right? And there's a stepping back and enjoying the fruits of the produce that is actually delivered, whether it's flowers or food or honey that comes from the honeybees. To me, this is an opportunity to sort of think of networking in a different way. There is so much opportunity out there. It's really hard to choose. And that's why I think being intentional about it, thinking about each conversation as a learning opportunity so that you have a positive engagement model going into and coming out of each networking opportunity that you do invest in. and that you think about it on an annual basis and give yourself that health check so that you can re-till the ground, plant new seeds, fertilize. And in my case, I will say one of the seeds that I planted, it took a few years, but it came back around as an introduction to a board opportunity. And it is how I got introduced to one of my boards. And it took a lot longer than I expected, but they weren't ready for me at the time that I planted my first seed, but they were ready for me a few years down the road. And it's a great example of that patience that there is that's involved in this too.
Well, Katrinka, thank you so much for planting some seeds here with us today. We're very grateful.
It's been delightful. And Susan, it's been super to get to know you through this process.
And you.
That concludes this episode of BoardVision. We hope you enjoyed listening. Please subscribe and join us next time. Until then, visit NACDonline.org to stay informed about the latest resources NACD has to offer, such as memberships, certification, national or chapter events, and our content, including reports, articles, and Directorship Magazine. That's NACDonline.org. Thank you for listening.